Patrick, for joining Trade Unions for Energy Democracy in this up close and personal interview on your incredible victory for the BPRA, the Build Public Renewables Act in New York State. Maybe we can start off with a little introduction, how you got involved in this work, who you are. So yeah, maybe Michelangelo, you can get us started.
Yeah, happy to. So yeah, Michelangelo Pomerico. I'm the engagement coordinator for the Mid-Hudson Valley DSA, which is the local chapter of the Democratic Socialists of America, which organizes in Orange, Ulster, and Dutchess counties here in New York. I am also one of the legislative co-chairs for the Public Power New York Coalition. And I got introduced into this campaign actually by Patrick, who so kindly invited our DSA chapter to go to a strategy retreat where the formation of our Public Power Coalition took shape in 2019. Very formative experience for me. This campaign generally was transformative for my experience as an organizer in developing those skills and getting more involved in the climate fight. And yeah, I was lucky enough to have been involved in this campaign since its start 4 years ago. And it's been life-changing.
Beautiful. Thank you for joining us, Michelangelo. And Patrick.
So I have been working on energy issues since 2013, fighting against the expansion of fossil fuel infrastructure. And over time, our experiences and my experiences with the energy system led me to believe that we were never going to have the energy system we wanted if we left it all up to the profit motive. And it was through that realization that I started organizing with the Democratic Socialists of America and encouraged them, the New York City Eco-Socialist chapter, to join the New York Energy Democracy Alliance. And I remember that meeting very well, where Mid-Hudson Valley came in and we formed the coalition. And it's just been an incredible experience. I'm so proud of everyone who worked on this. I think that Michelangelo is definitely correct. It definitely honed my own personal experiences as an organizer, but that's also really underselling it. I think I am a completely different person than the person I was as a result of this struggle, and it's really beautiful to be here at the culmination of it.
Amazing. Okay, so we're gonna jump right into this profit motive and also the organizing that happened behind the scenes. So the BPRA, the Build Public Renewables Act, mandates that the public sector step in where the private sector fails to deliver on the state's goal, the mandated goal, to get to 70% of its power from renewable sources by 2030. So this begs the question, why would the private sector be failing? Tell us, maybe Patrick, a little bit about the class enemy in this struggle for decarbonizing the New York State economy. Who is this class enemy, and what's their track record on decarbonization?
So this is going to vary state by state, but in New York State, it's sort of a medley of class enemies. There is renewable energy capital, which is I'm going to very briefly talk about how renewable projects have been built historically in New York State and are built in many parts of the country. So many renewable energy projects, particularly utility scale projects, are funded through tax equity swaps, where you have to enter into a bargain with giant banks who can benefit from the tax breaks, the investment tax credit and the production tax credit that are available to people developing projects. So these investors usually take something like 20% to 30% of the value of the project, and they're able to do that because they have a monopoly on capital. They have a monopoly effectively on the ability to build. And so some of the biggest projects in New York State are in fact owned by Goldman Sachs. And the The other enemies, of course, are the utilities who have no interest in creating more renewable energy or bringing more distributed generation resources onto the grid, and they sit on the information that is necessary to build. It's considered proprietary information. Great system we have. So it's really a perfect storm of oppositional class interests, and this is why historically we've been stuck at 5% wind and solar in New York State for a very long time, despite having this reputation as being a progressive state. And when we were thinking about this, we were looking at the landscape of New York and saying, okay, well, capital has historically had a giant monopoly on building projects. Are there institutions that could get around that? Are there institutions available to us that could be a vehicle for building public renewables? And we are very lucky that we have a New Deal era authority created as part of the New Deal to manage New York's existing hydropower resources for the public good. And we were like, it seems like the state is just sitting on this incredible opportunity. What would happen if we changed the law to expand that authority and make it a vehicle for the will of the people? And that is what we have done.
Beautiful, beautiful. So that segues into the next question about the vision of the BPRA. And so as you said, the class enemy is like class enemy with a capital C, capital E. This is like some global class enemy stuff, because of course in New York State we're in the belly of the beast and the home of Wall Street, and of course also the home of it's a union town of class struggle. So it's a perfect storm, but this system sounds like a complete mess. So on the flip side, what alternative does the Build Public Renewables Act offer to that for-profit shit show? And maybe you can paint a little bit of a future of New York State, the one that we're fighting for, the one that we want, including BPRA, but also maybe going beyond that. And whoever wants to take it on.
Well, if it's all right, Milo, I'm going to take that just because I have to hop. I do think that this represents a opportunity to really chart a different course with respect to labor in particular. The bill mandates project labor agreements, prevailing wage, applications to contractors and subcontractors, and really I believe is going to lift working conditions for renewable energy workers for the entire sector, not just for NYPA projects. I really do believe this is going to set a new standard within the sector as a whole. And that was part of the reason, I think, why this bill was able to gain the labor support that it gained and why it was ultimately able to pass. And the story of how we engaged labor, I think, is really worth telling for any organizers or activists that are seeking to work in this space. In New York, the same as everywhere else, it is a union town, but unions still are fighting a defensive battle in this state just as much as anywhere else. And so, many unions, I think, initially at least, viewed the Build Public Renewables Act with some trepidation, just because it's going to shake up the status quo. There were unions and are unions that know how to organize in the context that we have, and we do not want to interrupt that. We want to strengthen that. And so there were some conversations we had to have where first we said, who are the workers that are going to be most directly impacted by this bill? What kind of language can ensure their support? And very often in the state, the Federation of Labor, the AFL-CIO, will defer to the position in terms of state policy of those workers who are most directly impacted. And so we worked to gain the support of New York State United Teachers. I have to give them some love because it was their resolution, I think, that made sure this rose to the attention of the statewide AFL. And then for most of the spring of 2022, we were working through Senate Central staff with the AFL-CIO to perfect that language. And that language ended up making its way in its totality into the final version of the bill. And that meant that the AFL-CIO was able to stay neutral. And while, once we had that guarantee of neutrality, we started expanding our outreach and really thinking about unions as representatives of working people, not just in the workplace, but these are people who live in communities and they have environmental justice concerns as much as anyone else. And the environmental justice concerns were a huge reason why 99 SEIU ended up issuing a memo of support as well. We saw UUP, we saw UAWA, we saw a real, snowball effect of union support. And I really do think that we could not have passed the bill without it. So I'm really excited by the lessons learned from this campaign.
Thank you, Patrick, and thank you for joining us from the airport. I'm glad that we caught you just as you're literally setting off into the sunset to fight evil somewhere else, I'm sure. So thank you, goodbye.
It's a much weirder story, and I will tell you another time. Yes, thank you all. Have a great day.
That's hilarious.
Can I add something to that last question?
Yeah, please.
So like the vision, I think too, moving forward, one of the things that I think is really inspiring and exciting about the Build Public Renewables Act is that it is very much a scaffold that socialist organizers and the left can organize on. We have passed legislation that is going to make it easier to organize for a publicly owned energy system, starting with a build out of generation and transmission projects to meet our state climate goals. I'm personally really excited for the potential doors that may open up for working with the trades, specifically for a truly just transition because of the labor provisions that made it into the bill. And I think it's really incumbent on us as organizers to not assume that passing this legislation means our work is done, but to see that the Build Public Renewables Act is a tool for further organizing and building the movement that we need to win a Green New Deal. And so, I think in some ways, like BPRA is kind of like a Trojan horse of sorts in that regard. It's kind of advancing the terrain in a way that is strategic and is going to make it easier for us to create potential future wins. That's really exciting to me personally as an organizer.
Let's talk a little bit more about the labor protections in the BPRA. Labor provisions gave a big push to the BPRA, and it's been said that a big part of the reason real climate bills and not just targets are starting to pass is because of this bottom-up grassroots coalition building with labor unions. What are the labor provisions in the BPRA, and what was the behind-the-scenes process like for writing them in?
Yeah, so some of the really important provisions include prevailing wage and project labor agreements for every NYPA project. There is also really quite interesting is NYPA will be giving $25 million a year to the Department of Labor, which is actually exciting because it represents also an opportunity in the future to expand a potential labor fund for a just transition for workplace, for getting workers trained in renewable energy. So that's really exciting. The one thing I really wanted to kind of center for the labor strategy overall is the earnestness of which our coalition over the last 4 years persistently worked to ensure that in every conversation we were having with labor, that we were always cementing that we were there to listen, to learn, and to try to collaborate, that we wanted the best possible labor language in our bill. And I think actually in some ways, initially, some of the unions kind of probably scoffed at us, not believing that we actually meant it, because the history, right, is one where it has been very difficult to kind of get that language in pieces of legislation around climate or around the energy system. But we were pretty uncompromising in wanting the best possible provisions for workers. I think there there were definitely like times where it was very hard to get our foot in the door or to have those conversations or just get the conversation at all. But there were turning points throughout the campaign where we saw labor really coming to the table after moments where we had shown strength in the movement in moving this legislation forward. Notably, last year when we passed BPRA in the state Senate, that really was a shot across the bow. And because we passed a version with these gold standard provisions, I think that really stood out to labor in a way that I was like, oh, they're serious. They actually want to pass the real thing. And, you know, one of the other kind of historic moments that we had in our campaign last year was when the state called a special hearing post legislative session to talk about the Build Public Renewables Act. And it was a hearing where we heard from, you know, labor leaders, we heard from policy experts and advocates. And in that hearing, there's an amazing clip of Pat Guidis, who's the business manager for IBEW 1049, saying that the labor language in the Build Public Renewables Act is the best that he has ever seen in any piece of climate legislation, and that he was skeptical at the time that it would pass with those provisions, that the language would end up being watered down, right? Because that's his experience. That's the experience of labor in New York, is that the language is always watered down. And so I think that when we did pass it in the Senate and we continued to be really adamant about our commitment to those provisions and not wanting to see them be lost, I think that was really important for getting labor bought in and building the labor coalition that we had behind us. And then, of course, you know, when Governor Hochul introduced her executive version of BPRA, what we called BPRA Light, and it had omitted literally all of the labor language in our bill. I think that was also a really critical wake-up call of like, oh, turns out the governor may not be looking out for the best interests of workers. And it was a kind of reaffirming Pat's concern, right? That like, oh, like they're not going to pass this version. You know, we have all this great language, but if it doesn't pass, then what good is it, right? And so that really, I think, gave us a strong foundation in this year to really fight for the full deal, because we had this leverage with the governor introducing something that had, you know, not accounted for labor's concerns at all, and omitted all of the key language that we were fighting for. And so that really gave us an opportunity to hold that like moral line on that issue and work with the central staff in the Senate, with our champions, to really push for this message that, you know, this is a just transition piece of legislation, right? That Build Public Renewables is about protecting the interests of workers in the transition to renewable energy in New York State.
Okay, thank you. Let's get into the sort of backstage organizing of this campaign, because I think, you know, a lot of trade unions around the world are, let's say, imagining something similar to this in their countries and their states respectively, but it's fucking hard. And it's, you know, I think we always look to inspiration wherever there are victories. So let's dig into that a bit. As you mentioned, this was a 4-year, very intensive campaign. How did the campaign win the hearts of New Yorkers and create shifts in the political imagination of just what's possible and necessary? And then how did you sustain these extremely impressively high levels of engagement, of organizing online, but also across the state, on the streets, and just high levels of participation? And what kept you going when the odds of passing this historic legislation seemed, you know, beyond reach?
Yeah, so, you know, I think it's really important to contextualize that this fight was made possible because we had a really strong core socialist organizing project behind it through DSA, chapters across the state being involved in the Public Power New York Coalition, which is itself is, I think, a really unique and strong coalition space in the context of the climate left in New York. We're a pretty democratic coalition compared to some that I've been in. We are very collaborative. And I think because we invested so much in those relationships and the partners that we have in that coalition space, and really using the coalition strategically to move this bill, I think that was a really big tool for kind of creating a lot of the potentials that made this win possible. I think the other thing that we talked a little bit at the beginning about, but is really important to emphasize, is that there was a really strong level of investment and development of leaders and organizers throughout the campaign, specifically in DSA. I know, this was my own personal journey in DSA of joining the organization with no experience as an organizer and coming off this 4-year campaign feeling like I know so much more and have so much lived experience now. And I know that Patrick said the same, right? It was pretty life-changing, I think, for every person involved in this campaign in terms of their own trajectory as an organizer and how they see themselves in the movement. And there was, I think it's also really important that when we talk about how this bill was passed, it was not just a legislative campaign, but we really pursued a lot of multi-tendency strategies to ensure victory. And one of those was a really complex electoral strategy that DSA organized last year through the Green New York slate, which was a slate of our existing incumbent socialists in office, which is our slate of electeds that DSA has been endorsing and getting into office over the last few years, since I believe 2018. And our slate last year really highlighted a couple races that were very strategic. One was David Alexis, who ran for state senate against the bill sponsor, Kevin Parker. That was because at the time, Kevin Parker was very oppositional to the bill, wasn't really moving it through the legislature. And so David's race was a confrontation of that status quo and an opportunity for us to organize against our sponsor to try to move that bill. And that was an effective strategy. We actually were able to pass it in the state senate last year, in large part because of the groundswell of organizing that took place around David's race. The other race to highlight in the Green New York slate was the one I was personally involved in, which was Sarah Shresta's race for the 103rd Assembly District here in the Hudson Valley, where we unseated a 27-year incumbent who was the chair of the Insurance Committee and who was oppositional at the time to the Build Public Renewables Act. And, I think it's important to highlight that in the same way that I had a personal journey as an organizer in this campaign because of my work on Build Public Renewables, Sarah Hanna also was an organizer in DSA who had been involved in the Build Public Renewables Act campaign. And her decision to run was, again, a strategic choice that we made to try to advance the math in the legislature, specifically in the assembly, to try to move this bill. Our campaign here in the Hudson Valley, we knocked 56,000 doors. We spoke to tens of thousands of people, and climate was really at the center of our race. We here in the Hudson Valley and really across the state, we are dealing with an extreme crisis of affordability. And specifically in the Hudson Valley with our investor-owned utility, Central Hudson, people have been facing incredibly high utility costs for the last year, with many people I spoke to paying upwards of $500, $600, $700, $800, even $1,000 or more a month at the time in their monthly utility bills. We're talking, people who are retired, right, living on fixed income, who are getting $800 bills in the mail when they're only making $1,100 a month. And it's like, how do you live like that? We had so many powerful conversations where we were able to expand the political imagination of the electorate, specifically around this issue of public power and around the state's role in building renewable energy. And that was really powerful. And I think that when we look at the history of this campaign, it was the organizing we did in a legislative context of talking to people specifically about public power. It was our inside strategy of organizing electeds through our socialists in office, through progressives who we built a coalition with to move this bill. It was also just an incredible grassroots campaign through both the coalition, but also through these electoral fights that really brought the issue to tens of thousands of people across the state. And I think just raised an awareness around what is possible that really was not part of the conversation prior to this campaign getting off the ground. Those were like the two I really wanted to emphasize. I think it's important, again, that the context of how we built this campaign, it was not just a legislative campaign, but it was a really broad multi-tendency strategy. And it was not any one thing. We've been thinking about this a lot in the last couple of weeks that we can't point to one thing that won this campaign. It was really everything coming together. It was a culmination of so many different tactics and strategies that made it possible. And it's impossible to remove any one thing and say that we may have been able to win without it. It really took every tactic that we had tried to pursue to make it possible.
Wow. Okay, so I want to backtrack a little bit and talk again about public ownership and ask, in in these discussions, and this is something that is the case everywhere from, the cradle of neoliberalism in the streets of Santiago, Chile, to, my home country in Colombia, to, anywhere really else where the devastating impacts of neoliberalism have also sort of permeated the mainstream of status quo. So I want to ask, a lot of people talk about public ownership as like a New Deal era thing, or like a thing that is like of a bygone era, or a pipe dream, or something that can happen somewhere else, but not in New York State, again, home of Wall Street. So in these discussions that you had, how did you talk about public ownership in energy? And you've already touched on this a little bit, but like the political and the technical importance of public ownership in energy.
Yeah, so I think it is really important that, again, we like contextualize that we have a really massive crisis of affordability. And when we talk about public power, both in the political and in the technical sense, what we are really talking about is eliminating the profit motive from our energy system. And so I think that it is an inherently like popular and working class message to talk to people who are struggling to just make ends meet and pay their bills about what a publicly owned energy system could mean for them. It is also a public safety question and a question around the like sustainability of our communities in climate crisis. We've had multiple years now, whether it's our summers where we have blackouts and brownouts across the state, whether it's in the winter during our campaign when we were knocking doors following a massive ice storm that left many people in our district without power for up to 5-6 days. We had emergency warming shelters that had to be set up to house people temporarily while they were working to get the heat back onto their homes. And so we were always centering a historical and a current context of what public power looks like nationally, where we have examples of public power in the US, where we know that the reliability and the outage times for utilities are a lot lower when they're publicly owned compared to a for-profit system. And we also now know in New York State, especially because of our last election cycle where we passed Prop 1, which was our, basically a ballot measure to ensure that we have a constitutional right for clean air and clean water. This bill actually received more votes than the governor on the ballot, which is incredible, overwhelmingly popular on both sides, both parties. And so what we know is that like New Yorkers overwhelmingly care about climate. It is an urgent issue that New Yorkers care about. It is impacting people in their everyday lives. Whether that is the cost of heating their home or keeping their lights on, or if it is an issue around an extreme weather event, putting them and their family in harm's way. And so I think the conversations around public power that we were having were about our ability to have an energy system that puts people and planet before profit and ensures that we are investing in a grid that is going to be more climate resilient and ensure that we are actually lowering costs of energy for people in their daily lives so that they are not being strapped with these incredibly high bills that are literally like, wrecking them. And many utilities have like automatic billing. So like you could get like $1,000 bill and it just gets sucked out of your bank account. And, we know many families are only one financial emergency away from disaster. And so you can imagine that the amount of stress that so many families across the state were facing when these major bills would be coming down on them, right? There's just so many good arguments for a publicly owned system. And I think we found those conversations to be really powerful, that it was a class issue. It was an issue of people thinking about their kids' future or their grandkids' future. It was generational. And so, yeah, I think specifically on the political question, it was a pretty easy conversation for us to have at the door with people, because who wants to pay a high energy bill? I think that it was pretty universal in its appeal.
Okay, that's awesome, because yeah, I mean, you could open with, we need public ownership of energy and renewable energy in New York State or wherever. And definitely some people will nod their head and be on board and sign up right away. But there's, the the approach that you all nailed, which was okay, like clean slate. Does everyone deserve clean air, and safe environments and clean water? Yes, check. Okay, does everyone want like effective, clean public transportation? Yes, check. Okay. Do we have mandates to reach, 70% renewable energy by 2030? Yes, okay, check. And it's mandated, right? It's the law of the land. Okay, check, just checking. And you one by one, are the private renewables completely failing at getting it? Yes, okay. So there, and I love how you guys just arrived, brought people to, people who may not have been on board to this conclusion of like, okay, it's not only the best way, it's like the only way also to get to where we need to go. Just two more questions. Okay, so I've read, some of the DSA comrades say like, Chan, this is just the beginning, like we're just getting started. This was step one. And so I want to ask a kind of general, like, what's next question for the public power campaign. And I want to tie it in with, a question about like the challenges and sort of dangers ahead in terms of corporations. Obviously, they're not going to take this lying down. They have been fighting you all, and they will continue to attempt to water down, corporatize, and just otherwise disarm the BPRA. And this is potentially especially the case where public-private partnerships exist. And so what's the importance of keeping the pressure on and the movement organized? And yeah, what's next?
Yeah, so we just won, and we are already like figuring out like what is the next phase of the campaign. And for us, one of the things that we are recognizing as an obstacle that we have to clear now is the leadership structure at the Power Authority. And so the authority is currently helmed by Justin Driscoll, who was a lead attorney at the authority under the Cuomo administration and the previous president. He is now serving as an interim executive of the authority. We, based on his track record as someone who has donated to Republicans, who has, served the interests of the fossil fuel industry, we recognize that, him and the board of trustees, who primarily are made up of people appointed by Cuomo, who are all holdovers from that administration, are not really equipped or don't necessarily have the core interests of getting this bill implemented as their prerogative. And so I think our advantage going into this fight around the leadership of the authority is that we have, again, a really strong scaffold to work off of. The bill includes requirements around public-private partnerships, such as NYPA owning a majority stake in all the projects that they are a part of. Really robust public oversight through multiple public hearings and public comment periods around their planning process that involves state agencies as well. And so I think it is really incumbent on us now in this next phase to start having the bigger conversation of, okay, we've passed this transformative Green New Deal legislation in New York State. What kind of leadership do we need at the New York Power Authority in order to ensure that its potential is fully met? And we can literally rely on the mandate of the legislation to make the case that we need leadership that really believes wholeheartedly in seeing this legislation implemented the way it deserves and the way that New Yorkers need it to be implemented in order for it to be fully realized. And so, we're trying to dump Driscoll. We want to see an executive at NYPA that is not going to just support this legislation, but is going to lead on it and ensure that NYPA really is leading the nation in publicly owned renewable energy.
Okay, beautiful. I love the dump Driscoll. I mean, just in general, the public power campaign had such great comms work, like the memes, the, designing the covers of a magazine of like, Hochul, are you gonna burn or build? Or like, so creative, lots of funny content, which I think is just speaks to the creativity of the comms team.
Absolutely. On that, just real quick, we have some of the most incredible comms geniuses. I can't say enough. Our comms team is incredible, absolutely incredible.
Yeah, I all around applause and learned a lot from them watching this campaign network. So I just want to close with one final question about I guess like words of wisdom or calls to action or spaces to watch next in the energy transition class war, either in the United States as it relates to the Green New Deal or just internationally.
I think I almost want to go back to something Patrick said earlier, which is that this legislation really represents a historic opportunity to align workers and the our goal of having a livable planet in a really concrete way. I think that it is potentially hard to replicate BPRA nationally because NYPA is such a unique entity. But the concept of public power and aligning the interests of the public sector and the trade unions is, I think, really important to pursue as a national strategy and international strategy. And I hope that DSA and Public Power New York and all of our allies here in New York can continue to organize to ensure that the BPRA is fully implemented and proves what a just transition really can look like, so that other states can then say, oh, well, hey, it turns out that when you expand the public sector and you give the state a bigger role, they actually do a good job and they like hire and create all these new union jobs and really do create a just transition. So I'm very hopeful that we can continue to follow through on that promise and ensure that we organize to make it a reality. For Mid-Hudson Valley DSA on our campaign with Sarahana last year, we said two things. We said that the future is a public good, and we said that the future must be beautiful. And I think we have to continue to inspire and portray a sense of hope about the future of this world, right? Like, climate is really scary. The climate crisis is overwhelming sometimes. And I think that one thing that a takeaway for me is that, it took us 4 years to pass this. I am incredibly hopeful that just seeing how much growth we have seen here in New York in the experience gained on this campaign, that future campaigns will not take 4 years to win, and that we can continue to build power and specifically align with labor in a way that can build a really strong movement here in New York to start accelerating the number of wins we see in towards our overall goal. Which is, of course, taking over the entire energy system in New York State and across the country. So yeah, I think this is, like I said, this is a Trojan horse, right? Like, this is our foot in the door, and the work really starts here in this moment now. And I'm very excited and inspired by the potential, I think, on the horizon here in New York and across the country and the world.
Thank you so much. I think also, as Patrick said, you're doing something right if literally everyone is fighting you. And I'm sure that will continue to be the case. So it'd be cool if we do like a check-in on how the BPRA is doing like a year from now and see, what challenges have come up and do that follow-up work. And to add, when we fight for public ownership and democratic control of energy in the context of the energy transition, I think, public ownership is just like one of the elements, right? As you were saying, it has to be democratized. It has to have workers and community involved and electricity users. And there's so many examples around the world that point to creative ways to make sure that public companies actually comply with their public mandate. So thank you so much.
forever and ever and ever and ever. Come on. We ain't going nowhere.